It's December 12, 2018. I'm Doug Stevens, and this is Retail Profit. It's no secret that the department store channel is under siege. Sears recently filed for Chapter 11, JCPenney has been on life support, while Canadian, UK, and European department stores like Debenhams, House of Fraser, Galleria Kaufhof, and Hudson's Bay, to name only a few, struggle. But deep in the heart of Texas, one man is aiming not only to turn the fortunes of the department store, but also to reinvent the very concept of what a department store is. Neighborhood Goods opened its first store recently, and I caught up with founder Matt Alexander shortly before the opening to discuss his unique approach to this concept. When one imagines a titan of retail, Matt Alexander might not fit the image you'd conjure. Sporting a long hipster beard and adorned in streetwear, Matt looks like someone more at home in a recording studio than a retail boardroom. But early into a conversation with Matt about Neighborhood Goods, you'll realize this young, British-born serial entrepreneur is all business.
So I'm born and raised in London, and have somehow found myself in Dallas, Texas for the past 12 years. So I moved over to the US for university, went to SMU here in Dallas, and never planned to stay, but after a brief stint in corporate America, started two different very sort of editorially driven e-commerce brands, in addition to, probably of the most relevance to this, a non-profit, which is still providing free retail and event space to independent entrepreneurs here in Dallas. And so I have been sort of playing around in this retail and media world for the past 8 to 10 years or so. And all of it has sort of culminated in what I'm developing now with Neighborhood Goods, where we brought together the element of the podcast, which I still have, to the editorially driven e-commerce, to the very communal and very sort of open sort of concept for physical retail. And so it's all sort of come together at this sort of nexus point now.
I wondered, with news headlines dominated by the death of physical retail and the dominance of companies like Amazon, Alibaba, and others, what would inspire a young entrepreneur to make such a big bet on brick and mortar?
After selling my two very sort of editorially driven brands back in 2016 or thereabouts, I was sort of looking for what was going to be next and what made sense. And I was approached by my now business partner, a guy called Mark Macys, who has a much more impressive background than me, first of all. But he had helped brands like Apple and Bonobos and Warby and lots of others get into physical retail in the first place and help them create, really compelling concepts in that regard. And he was also a founding investor in Restoration Hardware. And so he called me, or sent me an email out of the blue via one of my past investors. So one of the largest investors in my last company was also one of the people that helped Mark fund Restoration Hardware back in the day. And so he was sort of a connection point between both of us. And we came together and suddenly found out that we knew all the same people and sort of had a lot of very similar opinions about the space. And so him with a lot of experience in the real estate side of things and me on more of the sort of contemporary elements of it, we sort of came together around this conversation of, what it was going to take to help more direct-to-consumer and digitally native brands get into physical retail and how to lower the barrier to entry and how to sort of create a whole new type of retail experience around it. And so he had helped develop a new shopping development in Plano, Texas, called Legacy West. He had been the real estate partner there, so he had helped curate it. And he took me out there about a week after we first met and said, I want this to be a canvas. And it was still under construction at the time, but you could see the bone structure of, Bonobos, Peloton, Warby, West Elm, Lululemon, all these concepts starting to come together in this sort of remarkable mixed-use development. And so I went away and wrote up this sort of, he refers to it lovingly as my manifesto. And we went from there to start raising capital. And the core thesis of it was creating ostensibly a new type of department store that rather than having that fixed landscape of racks and seasonal products, instead it would feature this ever-changing landscape of different brands and brand activations from all sorts of different companies, not just the direct-to-consumer crowd. And by, activations, all these sorts of, various elements of lingo we have around the whole thing, we're really talking about a space where brands can do pop-ups, essentially, for varying different lengths of time, where we can bring people together to help express an element of their brand that they may not be able to sufficiently articulate on the web. And so what we found was that a huge amount of direct-to-consumer and digitally native brands are trying to get into physical retail, but the barrier to entry is still fairly high. You have to think about staffing. You have to think about signing long-term leases. You have to think about all these different elements to the whole thing. And so even doing pop-ups can be quite cumbersome and expensive for them, but they still really want to do it. And so what we've been seeing is a lot of brands getting really creative with it and looking at it as a marketing expense. And I think through that lens, it's led a lot of people to start thinking a lot differently as to what can be done with a physical space. And so for us, the core concept was how we could create a vehicle for brands to do things like that. In addition to that, what we really wanted to think about was how to develop this sense of community and this very sort of intangible sort of feeling around the thing. And so recognizing that so much of retail can be so pretentious and alienating for the average person, how could we design something from the ground up so that it's incredibly useful for brands, regardless of what their goals are, really comfortable and exciting for consumers, and just generally sort of carry this really sort of unique character about itself.
But it also begs the question, when most new concepts are choosing New York, San Francisco, or LA as launch points, why Matt and co-founder Mark Macinter chose Plano, Texas as the site for Store One.
There's always been this sort of apprehension to the fact that I'm talking about Plano, Texas. Well, at least I assumed there would be. And so I would start pre-apologizing before I said Plano aloud to any of our potential partners or investors. So I'd go as long as possible articulating the idea before I said Plano. But what's been interesting is that, for most of these direct-to-consumer brands, Dallas-Fort Worth as a whole tends to be in the top 5 markets, or at worst, top 10. And so they're aggressively looking to get into markets like this, but they just don't have it as high on their list of priorities because most of them just want to follow each other into Soho, into LA, into San Francisco.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so for us, this is sort of an opportunity to do something a little bit different. And so because the barrier to entry is much lower and it's much more efficient to open something with us, you get to be much more playful and you get to test all sorts of different ideas in a new format. And so not only do you access this really sort of hungry and different sort of customer type, but you also get to do it in a really playful and sort of much easier and efficient way.
As Matt described the project, it seemed to me that neighborhood goods was a unique convergence of a number of concepts that have emerged over the past decade. Storefront was a pioneer in rethinking the nature of commercial leasing, offering pop-up space to emerging brands. Rachel Schechtman, founder of New York-based Story, was an early innovator in the idea that retail was less about sales per square foot and more about being a media channel for brands. Vibhu Norby and his partners at Beta developed the idea that retail is really a capture point for valuable consumer data and the monetization of consumer product interactions, all complemented by offering retail as a service, so brands can tell their story without the worry of having to run a retail operation.
Yeah, so it is a little bit of a convergence of a lot of those ideas. I would also add to that it brings in a lot of very traditional elements of the sort of very sort of old school retail experience, where it's very much about developing that relationship and having something that's relevant to where you are in the world. And so for us, you walk into the space, it's just under 14,000 square feet. Directly in front of you, probably the most obvious thing as soon as you walk in is that we've developed our own restaurant, prim and proper, that's going to be right at the heart of the space. We've designed that to have lower ceiling and a different lighting environment, and to sort of be very much this safe space right in the center of the room. So it'll be great for coffee and, light bites in the morning to, a great lunch during the day, great cocktails into the evening. Just this really easy, well-edited and sort of thoughtful food and beverage experience right at the core of the space. Around you, there's about roughly 15 different brand activations. And so that's anything from Primary, the kids brand, to Draper James, Reese Witherspoon's brand, to Stadium Goods in the streetwear world, to Buck Mason in the menswear world, to MeUndies, and all sorts of others in there. In addition to those, there's a lot of sort of subtle integrations of product throughout the room. So FrameBridge, for example, are providing framed artwork throughout the space. Simple Human are providing trash bins and soap dispensers and mirrors. We have a great independent artist, Rob Wilson, that's creating a lot of custom, really thoughtful and beautiful artwork throughout the space. The Inside, which is a direct-to-consumer furnishing brand, which has just sort of launched recently, are creating all sorts of custom and really special furniture for the space. And so, in essence, just about everything in the room is shoppable. You can buy just about everything. So as little as down to the cutlery you're using to eat at the restaurant, to the cookware you're seeing used to make your meal, all of that is purchasable.
In terms of staffing, Alexander takes the view that it's really more about hospitality than retail sales.
We provide all the staff. We provide pretty strong aesthetic guidelines and parameters. So it feels very consistent and cohesive. The staff are very much trained and oriented around hospitality, so they're there to have nice discussions with people and to sort of be very informed and talkative about the brands that they're representing inside the space. But being able to talk about everyone in the room and facilitate transactions around every space of the room. At the same time, we've also developed a neighborhood goods app, which will launch on the same day we're opening. And that, at a distance, is great, sort of editorially driven e-commerce. As you get within, say, 25 miles, it orients itself around on-demand delivery, in-store pickup, RSVPing to events, looking at the menu for the restaurant. As you come into the space itself, leveraging your location within the room, we allow for you to text with staff with any questions that you might otherwise be self-conscious about. If you are sitting in the restaurant and you want someone to come to you with it because you have a question or you want them to bring you a product, you can do that there as well. As you walk around the space and you want to learn more about the inside and you may not be entirely familiar with them already, you can pull that up based on your proximity to a different brand area and look at the product mix, any sort of podcasts or content we've produced with them, and general sort of information that you might otherwise be curious to find out. And then obviously we also allow for completely self-guided checkouts as well.
Ultimately, there was one question that I, and I suspect you by this point as well, would be most interested in. How does Neighborhood Goods intend to make money?
So we really have two different models. One, which is probably the most common, is brands just paying us a fixed fee per month, which includes staffing, build-out, access to real-time data, which will be flowing from us. We manage all the transactions, we manage the technology, we manage everything. And so you can come in for as long as 12 months, you can come in for as little as 30 days, and in that time, we just make it incredibly easy for you. The other model is more popular with some younger brands we're bringing in to sort of pilot and test, where we're providing all the same services, but we're just taking a lesser fee in addition to a percentage of sales, still a lot less than what they would give up at wholesale if they were trying to do a pop-in with a department store or any of these sort of other concepts, but still, a positive revenue stream for us. And then, in addition to that, we obviously have e-commerce, the restaurant, and all sorts of other sort of tangential revenue streams. But that's, in essence, how it works there. And for us, it proves to be quite a responsible model. It allows for brands to get in a way that's much more efficient and easy for them. And it also means that if you look at it from a very sort of traditional sort of retail real estate perspective, that it has really aggressive payback periods and really strong sales per square foot and all these sorts of different sort of core metrics, and turns into quite a profitable model.
With all this in mind, my final question for Matt was, could this model potentially be a prescription for much larger incumbents like Macys, for example? Could a disruptive retail as media model apply to a conventional department store footprint?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I could be wrong about this, but off the top of my head, as I recall, the ratio of retail space to humans in the US is much, 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 much higher than anywhere else in the world. And I think we've probably created spaces that are much too large, that have sort of become these pseudo warehouses, to your point, housing a huge amount of products. And so I do think there's opportunity to do stuff in bigger spaces, but, doing a 200,000 square foot space or whatever it is likely irresponsible for us. I think what makes us interesting is that we have a point of view, we have an opinion that we are going to curate and experience. I think as soon as you start getting to that size, then it becomes much more scattershot. You're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. And I think it becomes much less compelling for the consumer, where if they're coming in and they have a sense of trust and relationship with your space, if it's a little bit smaller, that I think is going to create a much more sort of positive and dignified environment that gets people, excited. Now, for us, I think 14,000 square feet for us, or just under, is too small. It's a great starting point, and it's going to be an amazing expression of the idea, and I think it's going to, we're going to be incredibly, incredibly proud of it, and we're so excited to share it when we can. But for us, I think we'll probably end up with more like 20,000 square feet per unit. We certainly have far more brands than we have space. The parameters of that have led us towards these ideas around integrating products into the room rather than expressly having these product activations around the room. And so I think there is a lot of opportunity there, and there's obviously a huge amount of real estate that larger groups like Macys and Neiman's and all these other guys are going to try to have to fill and to activate in interesting ways. And I think that's going to, foster a very unique and special environment where people are getting very playful with what can be done in those spaces. I think just today we saw that Walmart announced they're going to start converting their supercenters into town centers with, restaurants and gyms and things like that around in green space. I think it's going to be an interesting time to see how people sort of take 100,000 square feet and carve it up so that there's less of it being expressly for retail and more of it being used in more sort of innovative ways. And so I think, for us, we're going to continue to experiment. We've been offered as large as 40,000 square feet without naming specific locations in one or two different markets around the country. And I think we're going to start seeing, for us, a general sort of internal curiosity to see what the sort of maximum limit is on this idea in terms of square footage. But I think, you have smart people at Macys and groups like that. I think they're going to come up with some interesting ideas in those spaces because they're going to have to.
Ultimately, what people like Matt Alexander and projects like Neighborhood Goods point to is a brighter future for retail. A future where the very concept of what a store is and how brands and consumers interact with them is changing entirely. A new breed of entrepreneurial thinking defining a future where retail once again becomes about creating enchanted spaces driven by community, connection, and remarkable customer experiences. You've been listening to Retail Profit. For more on this and other trends, visit our website at retailprofit.com and follow us on Twitter at retailprofit.